Hello, it's Mike from Victor's Art. I'm going to show you how you can solder little wire loops onto copper foiled pieces. Just a little quick tutorial. We get asked about this quite often. What kind of wire should we use? How do you hold everything in place given that you've got three things to hold and only two hands? You need to hold your soldering iron, you need to hold your loop, and you need to hold your solder at the same time. How do you get around that? I'll show you how you can do all of those things. You could certainly buy a little third-hand helping tools. There are lots of little gadgets you can use to hold things, but actually there's a really simple way to do it just by using the technique I'm going to show you. So watch out for the next chapter on this and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so we're going to make a little wire loop and solder it onto this little test piece. I make these when I'm doing workshops, just a way of demonstrating basic soldering. I'm going to use this 22 gauge plated wire. It's described as tinned wire, which usually would mean that it's plated with tin, which is a solderable metal. I do find that this is much easier to solder if you rub off some of the plating in the area where you're going to solder. So I'm going to do that. I'm using 22 gauge. It's thin and flexible but pretty strong. If your piece is somewhat heavier, you could use 20 gauge or you could go down a bit for a thicker wire. These make really nice neat loops because you can twist them up quite tightly. So I'm going to start out by cutting off 6 or 7 centimeters, and I'm going to wrap it around a cylindrical object. I'll wrap it by hand to start with and twist it by hand so it looks like that. Then I'm going to tighten it up with the pliers. Now I've cut off a longer wire than I need, so you can see I've got quite a bit that I need to trim off, which I will do. So I'm going to cut that off to give me 5 or 6 millimeters of loop, and I can then solder that onto my panel. Now I said that this is tinned, but it doesn't solder all that well. What you do in that case is to rub off the plating or the tinning of that wire. It is important that the wire underneath is solderable. This is copper wire underneath, so we know copper can be soldered, so that's why we're using this wire. So I've rubbed off the plating. You don't have to rub it all off, but you do need to see a bit of the copper metal underneath. And then the challenge is you've got 3 things to hold. You need to hold your soldering iron, you need to hold your loop, and you need to hold the solder. So the way around that is to put a little bit of flux where you want to solder your loop, and then add a little bit of extra solder onto your domed bead like that. We'll then add a bit of flux on the top of that and a tiny bit of flux on the wire loop itself. Now you obviously don't want to hold that in your hand because it's going to get very hot very quickly. So we hold that in the needle nose pliers, and then we just need to melt that into the solder blob that we've added on the top. So I'm going to heat the wire first a little bit and then heat the blob on the side, ease the wire loop down into the blob, and then hold it completely steady for at least 5 seconds. If the wire loop can move while the solder is solidifying around it, you'll get a cavity joint and it won't be, well, I was going to say it won't be strong. Actually, the wire loop will probably fall straight out. So that's had a little time to solidify and cool down. Hope you can see the wire loop there. There's no way that's coming off, and I didn't have to go through the process of finding something to hold the wire loop in place while I was soldering it. So now you could add fishing line or colourful ribbon or something. If you do use fishing line, I know you probably already know this, but if you tie fishing line onto something like a wire loop, anything metal, you need 3 knots next to each other, otherwise they'll come loose. So that's knot number 1, knot number 2, nearly there. And that's knot number 3. So as a consequence, there's no way that's coming off. I'm pulling pretty hard. It's going to cut my fingers in a minute. So based on the fact that you can only hold 2 things at once, we add a little blob of solder to the bead, a little bit of flux on top, then we melt the wire loop into that blob and tidy it up if we have to. Hope that's been useful. Happy wire loop making.